with Bill Young. He will be missed greatly. I thank the chairman for yielding. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We're also pleased to have a distinguished leader of the Florida delegation and now the dean of the Florida delegation, our senior member, with us tonight to pay tribute to Bill Young. And I'll yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Ross-Layton.
Well, thank you so much, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. A good man, warm friend, and a true patriot, Bill Young was an example for all of us here in Congress, and it was an honor and a privilege to serve with him. The loss of Bill's experience and knowledge will be felt by everyone in this chamber. The consummate gentleman from Florida, Bill was always ready to listen to his colleagues on both sides of the aisle, greeting everyone with a smile. Both principled and honest, while maintaining civility with his colleagues, Bill never allowed differences of opinion to devolve into partisan bickering and worked with Republicans and Democrats to balance our budget as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. A tenacious public servant, Bill dedicated his life to his constituents. His #1 priority was ensuring those who serve our country get the help and the services they need to be successful. Improving the quality of life for veterans and all active duty personnel, including those in the Reserve and the National Guard, well, this was Bill's mission. Bill was always there for those returning from combat, visiting and helping our wounded warriors with his wife Beverly, and providing for our veterans at the medical facility in Bay Pines that now bears his name. As chairman of the Appropriations National Defense Subcommittee, Bill oversaw spending by the Pentagon and worked to ensure the readiness of our military in combat. His efforts helped not just those in his district, but Americans across the nation. His legacy will be seen around every corner, from the beaches of Pinellas County to our fighting forces around the world. A genuine statesman, Bill's accomplishments are as varied as they are numerous. He fought to protect Florida's environment by blocking drilling close to our Gulf Coast and helping restore eroding beaches. With Beverly, Bill helped create a national bone marrow registry with almost 10 million donors registered thus far. Just as he fought for his own district, he could always be counted upon to help us with our constituent needs. In 1991, he saved MacDill Air Force Base in his district from closure, and a year later, he helped rebuild and protect Homestead Air Reserve Base in my congressional district after the devastation of Hurricane Andrew. Through his vital efforts, the Miami River in my district, that dredging project was completed, a project that continues to generate billions for the shipping industry to create jobs and spur economic growth in South Florida. It couldn't have happened without Bill Young. Bill was instrumental in assisting Tampa Bay residents and those in my South Florida community, and indeed across our country. A true gentleman, a public servant, and a friend, Bill Young deserves all of our thanks, Madam Speaker. He will be forever remembered as a champion, not just for Florida, but indeed for our entire great nation. I thank the gentleman for arranging this special order.
Thank the gentlelady. Pleased now to recognize a senior member of the Florida delegation on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Young was respected not only by his Republican peers and colleagues, but on both sides of the aisle. So the co-chair of our Florida delegation, Mr. Hastings, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you, Mr. Michael, my colleague, for arranging for this special order. And it is special that we come here to speak about a gentleman who was special to us all. Obviously, we're here with heavy hearts and great sadness tonight, honoring a friend and a colleague, Congressman Bill Young. Bill was an assiduous public servant and a tireless advocate for all Floridians. But above all, he was a man of integrity and a true statesman. The House of Representatives will not be the same without him. He served in Congress for 42 years, and I, as well as others, am deeply honored to have had the opportunity to serve alongside him for the past 2 decades. He dedicated himself to providing for our nation's servicemen and servicewomen and was a powerful voice for America's best interests at home and abroad. His distinguished career has left its mark on the lives of countless Americans. When I first came to Congress in 1992, I met with Bill Young and Sam Gibbons. They were on opposite sides of the aisle, but were dear friends dedicated to Florida and to making the Florida delegation strong. I remember vividly learning from both of them through the years. In addition, throughout all of the travails of hurricanes and disasters, Bill Young stood with all of us that suffered during those periods and did everything he could to bring resources to Florida and this nation during disasters. My first experience with an earmark was when Bill became chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And I didn't know much about the process, but I knew that I wanted to get money in the budget to contribute to the African American Research Center in Fort Lauderdale in my congressional district. When I went to him, I was nervous because I wasn't sure how it would be handled. And he calmed me very easily by saying, "It's done." And for sure, it had a hand in the development of that particular research center which stands, and I honor him for having assisted in bringing resources there. Speaker Boehner last week said it's only been a week since we began trying to imagine the House without Bill Young, an impossible task in its own right, and now he's gone. In our sorrow, we recall how not a day went by without a colleague seeking Bill's counsel as he sat on his perch in the corner of the House floor. I certainly had that distinction of going to that corner and consulting with him. President Obama said in his statement, and I lift it, that Congressman Young will be remembered for his advocacy and support for the armed services, service members and their families, as well as statesmanship, and a long history of working across the aisle to keep our country moving forward. And Defense Secretary Hagel said he will be remembered as a passionate advocate for the welfare of America's service members and military veterans. Though his loss will be felt by many, his legacy and commitment to a strong national defense will always inspire us. It is the height of irony that our friend would pass at Walter Reed Hospital. No one in this body spent as much time with our military at Walter Reed and around this country than Bill Young did. He, of course, has a legacy that is par excellence in that arena, and also in bringing resources to the area that he served, as well as in other areas around this nation. Tonight I join with the people of Florida in keeping Beverly, Bill's sons, grandchildren, family, friends, and staff in my thoughts and prayers during this time of enormous sadness and loss. And once again, I thank you, Chairman Mica, for arranging for us to have the privilege of honoring this great American.
Well, I thank you. And now continuing in hearing from the leadership of our delegation, I'm pleased to recognize the chairman of the Florida delegation, the gentleman whose district is adjacent to Mr. Young's to the south, Mr. Vern Buchanan, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise today in honor of the memory of my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Congressman Bill Young. For over 4 decades, there's not been a stronger voice in this chamber for our brave men and women in uniform other than Bill Young. My district was just south of Bill Young's district. We have almost 90,000 veterans. There's nobody that's benefited, I think, in terms of a district more than our veterans have in terms of Bill Young's leadership and what he's brought to Pinellas County and to the state of Florida. He was an inspiration to so many because he personified the most important virtue of public service. He did it for others. As Dean of the Florida delegation, Bill provided wisdom and counsel to members on both sides of the aisle. He served this great institution with devotion, civility, and distinction. I'm honored personally to have served with this extraordinary man. With his passing, the state of Florida and the nation have lost an outstanding lawmaker, statesman, and a public servant. My thoughts and prayers are with his family during this difficult time. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and I'm pleased now to recognize another colleague across the aisle. Again, Bill Young's friendships and his service included everyone in the House of Representatives and in the Congress. So I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Ohio, Marcy Kaptur.
I want to thank Chairman Mica so very much for the privilege of extending the deepest condolences of the people of Ohio to the Young family, to the constituents of Congressman Bill Young's district in Florida. It was such a privilege to know him. Truly, he was not just a vigilant patriot, though that surely would have been enough, but he really was a man of the house. He belonged here, and his people knew that for over 4 decades. When I think of Bill Young, I think of words like courage, perseverance, insight, and fair play. He had a gentlemanly demeanor at any time that I ever encountered him. He had a respect for regular order, for the gavel, and for seniority, which I share. He had a fortitude about him that people in my part of the country call real spunk, and he had a sparkle in his eye and an easy smile and an understanding. He was such a real human being. Part of that is the fact that he grew up very poor in Pennsylvania, in a coal town, in an old shack. He really knew what poverty was, and he didn't have an easy childhood, and he never forgot that. Yet he rose to be a master appropriator. But in that capacity, he was not imperious, but collegial, and he handled the gavel with fair play. He loved his wife Beverly so much. I can still see her sitting in the gallery or coming unannounced into a committee meeting. And he loved his family, and he loved Florida. And he worked so hard for the men and women in our armed services and our veterans, certainly in his own state, where right near him is the Bay Pines Veterans Medical Center, the 4th largest veterans facility in the country, but also all the operations of Southcom, in his last decade of service, dealing with all that we have to on the Defense Subcommittee in terms of the wars being conducted in Afghanistan and, of course, Iraq. He was engaged in all the intelligence at the highest levels and kept his good measure. His endurance and his heroic battles in these last years that all of us witnessed showed the true measure of the man. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say I'll be seeing Bill Young in all the old familiar places, not just here on the floor, but as we travel in Codels to some of the most godforsaken places on earth, as we visit some of the highest level research facilities in our country and our men and women in uniform. I shall always remember Bill Young and be grateful for having been able to serve with him. I thank you, Chairman Mica, for yielding me this time.
Thank the gentlelady. I'm pleased now to yield 3 minutes to another Florida colleague who is also a gentleman who served with Mr. Young distinguishedly on the Appropriations Committee, the gentleman from Miami, Mr. Mario Diaz-Balart, for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you. And first, Mr. Mica, Chairman Mica, thank you for bringing us together today. You've heard of Bill Young, the statesman, and that he was. We all know how he he was perhaps the best friend and strongest ally of our troops, men and women in uniform, those in battle, those currently in uniform, and those who are our veterans. But those of us who worked with him and got to know him here know him as, was frankly, as almost like a godfather to all of us. There's not one time that we didn't go to him that he would not be helpful. I remember after those storms in Florida when we had a bunch of hurricanes, and I remember going to see Bill Young about getting help for the folks who had been hurt by the storms, and his wisdom and his desire to help was always so present, and he was always helpful, whether it was Everglades restoration, because he was also such a champion for the environment. And again, always with a smile. And then I got to know him better when I, again, served with him in appropriations and was able to see how he mastered that appropriations process like, frankly, potentially nobody before him, and I think potentially nobody after him will again. But I will tell you, Madam Speaker, the part that to me was a real privilege was that he was one of the people that I whipped on my whip. He was on my whip card. So I would go on different issues and go talk to him about the issue and find out, you know, if he was leaning one way or another. And every time I went there, what I got from Bill Young was, frankly, a lesson. He instructed. I was never able to inform him about what the issues were. He informed me. He instructed me like he always instructed all of us. And always, Madam Speaker, with that incredible, warm smile, with that warm, firm handshake, which he had till the very end. He never complained. Because, you know, we all know that for a long time he was in pain, and yet never complained. He always wanted to make sure that you were feeling good. And he always wanted to know what he could do for you, never asking for himself. So I said recently, and I wish I got to find out who said this, but I heard or read someplace that to be a great man, you first have to be a good man. Madam Speaker, Bill Young was a great man for so many reasons. For all that he did for this country, for all that he did for the state of Florida, for all that he did for our troops and the environment, the way he helped his colleague, how generous and how humble and how caring and loving he was. He was an incredibly good man. And yes, if there's anybody that applies to, that before you can become a great man, you have to be a good man. If there's anybody that describes, it's our chairman, Bill Young. To his family, to his constituents, to the troops and the veterans who were in essence his family as well. Our deepest condolences. Bill Young is irreplaceable. There will never be somebody like him again. And what a privilege and what an honor. One of the privileges and honors, the greatest privileges and honors of my life was to be able to work with him, to get to know him, to be his friend. So again, to his constituents, to his family, our condolences. We will miss him, and he will never be forgotten. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Mike.
Thank the gentleman from Florida, and now pleased to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr, again reaching across the aisle with the respect and esteem with which in which Mr. Young was held. I yield 3 minutes to Mr. Farr from California.
Thank you, Congressman Mica, for yielding. I feel it's a very special privilege to be able to pay honor to our colleagues here, and I think of Bill Young as being one of the lions, one of the giants of this institution. Because he really used the institution for what we all get elected to do. First of all, he loved public service. He was in elective office for 52 years between state and federal government. He also served in the National Guard as a reservist, a National Guard active duty and reservist for 15 years. His life was about service. And he used his service here in Congress to be what I think this institution is all about. It's about leadership, it's about friendship, and it's also about accomplishment. I don't think anybody has had a better record of accomplishment in so many different fields. I came here in 1993, and I'd had the largest military base in the United States closed, Fort Ord, California, and I got to know the people on the Defense Appropriations Committee. On my side of the aisle was Jack Murtha. It seems like Jack's best friend was a Republican on the other side of the aisle, Bill Young. And Jack said, "You better go tell Bill everything you've told me about needing some help." We were trying to convert swords to plowshares by building a brand new university to serve the underserved population in Fort Ord, and we needed an appropriations for it. And Bill just jumped on it. He knew the purpose. Even though he was a strong warrior, he really realized that this was the future after a base was closed. So it was, and then I invited him out to the district, and he came to Monterey, California, where we still had the military with the Defense Language Institute. And Bill went in there and saw that all the languages we were teaching were the old tape recorders, where you had to wind and rewind. And he said, "My God, you need some modern equipment," and put in appropriations to get that equipment. He visited the Naval Postgraduate School and got a lot of really interesting feedback from soldiers who'd just come out of theater. But he and Jack's friendship, Jack Murtha, who predeceased him, was just remarkable in this house. And I think that's, you know, if there's a legacy here, it's their legacy. It's how two people being on Appropriations Committee should, and we all need to go back to what we've been calling regular order, where we really can't, we come here to accomplish things, to fix things that are broken. Bill Young was probably the first, if any, who would talk about needing to bring back the ability to help areas that just don't get formula money. Earmarks. I mean, if you disclose them and go through a process so that you don't have the, you know, the clandestine stuff, these things are good, particularly for rural Americans and particularly for areas where people are really poor. But I think my favorite story is that when he came out to the Defense Language Institute, came on military air, and Beverly, his wife, insisted, since I represent and live in Carmel, that I get our former mayor, Clint Eastwood, to have lunch with him. So we arranged that at Clint's Mission Ranch. And on the way from Monterey over to Carmel, we passed by the beach, and there's a stranded sea lion there. And Beverly gets out and says, "We got to take care of the sea lion before anything else," and has the entire crew of the airplane, because she insisted they had to come to lunch with her. They had to help get the sea lion. Well, we have Marine Mammal Rescue, and they eventually showed up. But when we got to the restaurant, I don't think anybody thought that the whole crew was going to come. And Bill was insistent. Nope, everybody's equal here. Didn't matter whether you were a Congress member or just a crew member, you were going to get a chance to have lunch with Clint Eastwood. We had a lot of laughs, a lot of discussion about things, and then that led to, and I hadn't realized that Bill was a big animal rights supporter. He and I authored a bill to with his friend Bob Barker, who is here. I met Bob Barker through him. Bob Barker, Wheel of Fortune, had dedicated a lot of his life to banning elephants in circuses. And Bill said, "I'm going to author that bill," and so we did a bipartisan author, and Bill Barker came, and in fact we linked up with Kim Basinger, who was also the movie star, who was very interested in that issue. And you know, we went on. We didn't win that bill, but we won the puppy mill bill, and we won some other humane treatment of animals. He was really interested in that. But best of all, I think he left a legacy that we need to get back to, a legacy of production, a legacy of camaraderie where we really like each other, and a legacy that takes care of not only all the soldiers, because they didn't care what rank you had. If you were a person in uniform, you were all equal and being going to be treated in the most respectful way. But he also did that for people of less fortune and for animals who need a voice in Congress as well. What a wonderful man. And Beverly, and your sons, I really going to miss going to Appropriations Committee and seeing bill there. So Beverly and your 3 adult sons, Rob, Billy, and Patrick, we all share your grief, and Congress will sorely miss Bill Young, a great man in this institution. Thank you. I yield back.
And I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to another Florida colleague, and he also has a district that is adjacent to Mr. Young's, Honorable Gus Bilirakis from the state of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Madam Speaker, I rise today to remember the life and service of someone I admire greatly for his wisdom and humility. What a wonderful man, my dear friend and mentor, Chairman Bill Young. While I always refer to him as Chairman because of the respect he commanded, he used to beg me not to do that, not to use that term, insisting in his typical humble fashion, as Mr. Farr alluded to, that we were all equal in this chamber. Over the past 5 decades, the Chairman graciously served Florida and the Tampa Bay area, leading many projects and initiatives to promote economic growth and create jobs back at home. His contributions to his district, the entire Tampa Bay area, and to the military in particular, are immeasurable. He was instrumental in saving MacDill Air Force Base and has helped grow Tampa Bay into a hub for our defense industry. In addition, he played a significant role in winning the critical funding for Bay Pines Veterans Administration Medical Center, which supports a large number of veterans in our area. For his efforts, my colleagues and I have joined together in support of renaming this valuable medical facility in his honor. His contributions also extend to higher education, with his role in developing centers of excellence in technology and marine science at the University of South Florida. And finally, we will all remember his work on behalf of sick children in creating a national registry for bone marrow donors. While the Chairman came from humble beginnings, he has left behind a rich legacy that we, as members of Congress and Americans, must all aspire to achieve. The Chairman was never afraid to reach across the aisle and always work for the greater good. I'm extremely thankful that I was able to express my gratitude and admiration to him last week when I visited him at his bedside, and I told him how much all of his colleagues loved him and his constituents loved him so very much and appreciated all he did for them. In closing, I wanted to share a few words from a final letter my father, former Congressman Mike Bilirakis, sent to his former colleague. And here goes. Dear Bill, since we are roughly the same age, remember I'm 5 months older, so we've joked about respecting your elders. We've expected that this day would come for both of us, but first for me and not so soon. We grew up in the same Pittsburgh area at the same time, tough depression, poverty, which made us tough. We didn't know each other then, but I guess our Lord decreed we would meet in Pinellas County, Florida, years later. We worked hard, climbed out of poverty, and became successful the good old American way. Bill, you have earned eternal rest, but our world will certainly miss you. The Florida corner and the House chambers will miss you as well. Thanks for being my friend and in many ways a younger mentor. Thanks for being a great American patriot. Thanks for the good that you've done for all of us. Yours has been a life well lived. May your memory be eternal. We'll certainly miss you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
And Madam Speaker, I would like to, at this time, yield back my time with the intent of relinquishing the balance of the time to one of the leaders from Florida and also member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Crenshaw. So I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Crenshaw, will control the remainder of the hour.
Madam Speaker, I give myself 3 minutes. I guess I'm recognized.
Gentleman's recognized.
Before I introduce and call on a couple of my colleagues, Madam Speaker, I'd like to say a brief word about my longtime friend and mentor, C.W. Bill Young. I first met Bill when he was in the Florida Senate. He was the Republican leader in the Florida Senate. He was the minority leader. And I think my colleagues might be interested to know that he was the Republican leader, the minority leader, not because he gathered all the votes of the other minority members, the other Republicans. He was the Republican leader because he was the only Republican in the Florida Senate. And you might say, well, maybe that diminishes that leadership role. And I would say that just the reverse is true, because Bill Young was such a great leader, such a man of courage and conviction, that he would stand up for whatever he believed, even if there was no one there to stand up with him. And I think it's because of that conviction, because of that commitment, that we are here tonight to honor his legacy. And I found it interesting, Madam Speaker, that about 25 years later, I found myself in the Florida Senate, and I became the first Republican to be elected president of that body, and I got a note from Bill Young. He said, "We've come a long way." And of course, when I came to Congress, he was there to help me become a member of the Armed Services Committee because he knew I cared about the military. He was there to help me become a member of the Appropriations Committee and the Defense Subcommittee, which he loved so very much. And he taught me and he taught all of us that everyone has value, everyone has worth, whether it's a private first class or a four-star general. And he lived and died by the belief that if we are to be the land of the free, it's because we take care of our brave. And so that's the way he lived his life. And we'll hear tributes tonight. We have heard tributes last Thursday in Largo at his funeral. But I believe that the lasting legacy that Bill Young leaves will be seen for generations to come in the greatness of our military and the compassion that we have for those who serve and those who are wounded. And so, Madam Speaker, I simply want to say tonight that America lost a great leader, and I lost a great friend. Godspeed, Bill Young. Now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to one of my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, the chairman of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee and a member of the Defense Subcommittee, which Bill Young chaired, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Granger.
I thank the gentleman from Florida for yielding me time. Madam Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to and celebrate the life of an outstanding public servant, Bill Young. It's a true honor to have been able to know a man like Chairman Young and to be able to call him both a friend and a role model for all of us. There's no one who is more respected, decent, gracious, dedicated, and humble. Everyone who crossed his path is richer for the experience that's evident through the hundreds of people who attended his memorial service last week. His service was attended by over 30 members of Congress. During a time of such partisanship, the respect for Chairman Young was illustrated through the attendance of members from both sides of the aisle, including leadership. The respect the military has for his lifelong advocacy for our national security and for our service members was evident through the attendance and heartfelt eulogies of former Deputy Secretary of Defense Gordon England and the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General James Amos. It was clear that the Department of Defense depended on him. Immediately before the service began, General Amos bestowed a very rare and appropriate honor by naming Chairman Young an honorary Marine. I'll never forget when I was first appointed to the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. As one of the first women ever to serve on the subcommittee, I wasn't sure how I'd be treated, but Bill immediately brought me in and treated me with respect and kindness, as he did to everyone. Gender didn't matter to him. He only cared about my commitment to the military and to our nation. When John Wooden wrote, "The true test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching," he clearly was talking about Chairman Young. Over the years, we've all heard many, many stories about the personal interest and assistance that he and Beverly provided for our wounded soldiers, but we never heard these stories from him. He never talked about what he did. He was motivated by doing what was right for someone else's health and well-being. When Marine Lance Corporal Josh Callahan spoke at the memorial service, it was the first time that most of us had ever heard about the extraordinary efforts the chairman and Beverly took to help this wounded warrior. Lance Corporal Callahan had been shot in the back and sustained significant damage to his spinal cord. With no family support system, he was in Bethesda, injured both physically and emotionally. And then he met Bill and Beverly Young, and his life changed forever. They stepped in and became his family, helping him to recover. Today, Josh calls the chairman and Beverly Mom and Dad. After many years of hard work, he's now married and expecting his first child. According to Josh, none of this would be possible without Bill Young. As I was thinking about what I wanted to say about Chairman Young, I realized it was impossible to do justice to such an extraordinary man merely through words. He was truly one of a kind. The best way we can honor this man is to redouble our efforts to our national security and to the treatment of our service members and their families. I ask that all my colleagues join me to make sure that we carry on his legacy. In closing, I want to let Beverly, their children, his friends, and his staff, who were part of his family, know that you all remain in our thoughts and our prayers.
Now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to another member of the Appropriations Committee, the chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Carter.
And I thank the gentleman from Florida for yielding. We can talk about Bill Young all night. A man who came from nothing and grew to be the head and shoulders above champion for our American military. But I think that the thing that strikes everybody who ever met, or struck everybody who ever met Bill Young, was his humanity. He was just such a kind, gentle, fine man. He cared about every soul he met. And he took the time when I was a freshman to meet me and talk to me, and I told him I had some interest in appropriation and learning how it worked. And he sat down and he talked to me about it. Whenever I had any questions I needed to ask him, he was always very, very informative and very, very kind in explaining things to people, to me and others. Bill Young was a very special man because he came from very, very, very meager means, and he rose up to a position of power, but you would have never known by his interaction with humanity that he was a man of power in this government, because everybody who draws a breath was important to Bill Young. But the most important people were those who served in our armed services. And I wanted to share, which I think is a perfect description of the kind of man Bill Young was. I had the privilege to go on a trip with him to Normandy for an anniversary of that landing at D-Day. And on the way we landed in Shannon, Ireland. And when we arrived, it just so happened that at least one or two brigades from Fort Hood, Texas, which is in my district, were there. Ordinary soldiers and their officers in transit to Afghanistan. And when Bill Young came in the room, ordinary soldiers, as if he were some kind of star that you would see in a rock concert, started moving over to have their picture taken with Chairman Young. Chairman Young at that time was in a wheelchair most of the time, but as he did when he presented his bill on this floor, he stood with every soldier and took a picture. And I stood on the periphery of that and listened. And he asked about their parents and where were they from and about their deployments and their needs. Just gentle, kind, friendly man with hundreds of soldiers gathered around him. And I heard one soldier ask another soldier, who is that guy? It looks like everybody here wants to have their picture taken. He said, I don't know for sure. But the way I understand it, he's the guy that makes sure when we go to battle, we have everything we can to be victorious. That's a great statement about a human being and a great statement about the man. And he cared about all who serve our nation, but in particular those who risk their lives on our behalf. So in honor of Bill Young, I will always remember that day where soldiers flocked to him just to be seen with Mr. Young. I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to yield time to another member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee that Bill Young chaired. And I'd yield 3 minutes or 2 minutes to the gentleman from California.
Thank you. Thank you. Tonight, I join my colleagues in honoring the life and legacy of a great man and an American patriot, Bill Young. I keep looking to my right and expect to see him with that great smile, but I'm sure tonight he's sitting at the right hand of God. The death of Congressman Bill Young was a great loss for this chamber, for our country, and for the millions of men and women in uniform who were Bill Young's priority for more than 40 years. Anyone who had served with Bill knew of his unwavering dedication to our active duty military, our veterans, and their families. As chairman of both the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee and the Full Appropriations Committee, he was both firm and fair. When it came to our troops, he was uncompromising and insisted on nothing but the best for the U.S. service members. Chairman Young was motivated by his genuine and deep concern for the well-being of the individual soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Guardsman. His concern went far beyond politics and policies. As many of you know, Bill and his wonderful wife, Beverly, took special interest in our wounded veterans, visiting their wounded regularly at Walter Reed National Military Center. Whether in committee hearing or in the military hospitals around the world, he was tireless in visiting, speaking with, and listening to these incredible service members. While we can't hope to replace Bill Young, perhaps we can follow his example and let his integrity, his gracious manner, his firm commitment to the men and women who protect this country serve as an inspiration to this chamber as we continue to wrestle with the same issues to which he devoted his life. On a personal note, I was honored to work with Chairman Young on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. I was continually impressed by his depth of knowledge. I think it's safe to say that no one understood the Department of Defense quite like Bill Young. His knowledge, expertise, and compassion will be sorely missed on the subcommittee. On my behalf, on behalf of so many former members who served with Bill, like our mutual friend and former Chairman Jerry Lewis, I extend my condolences to his wife Beverly, his sons, and his entire family.
Thank you. And I'd like to yield now to another member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
I thank my friend for yielding. Madam Speaker, like every Republican in this chamber until 10 days ago, every day I served in the House of Representatives, I served with Bill Young. As has been noted here, he was a lion, he was a legend, and at the time I was fortunate enough to come to this chamber in 2003, he was probably at the zenith of his influence. He was chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and he was the confidant of the President and our military leaders and, frankly, leaders around the world at a time when the United States was at war. No one cared more about the defense of the United States of America than Bill Young. And no one cared and did more for the people who actually bear the burden, the men and women that wear the uniform of this country, past, present, and future, than Chairman Young. But, you know, he was also a role model for many of us, and a mentor, and a friend. And he was somebody who would reach out and help you, and take care of you, and look after you, and give you the wisdom and advice that only he, with all those years of experience, can give. I remember on one occasion, not too long ago, Chairman was obviously ill the last several years of his life, still very active, chairing our committee, pretty busy man dealing with his own problems, and I had tornadoes that hit my hometown in Moore, Oklahoma. 2 days after those tornadoes hit, Bill Young was on the phone to me to tell me that I would be getting a telephone call from representatives of a New York investment bank called Cantor Fitzgerald, which had suffered grievous damage during 9/11, where they had lost over 650 of their 950 employees at the World Trade Center. That company made a commitment that it would look after all of its people and all of their families and would reconstitute itself, and it did. And then they built on that commitment and said, we're going to help other people that are in tragedy by devoting all of our profits, all of our revenues earned on 9/11 every year, not just profits, everything we earn, to help people in need. And they've kept that commitment. And Bill Young had forged a relationship with them because of all they had done to help men and women in uniform and the victims of disaster. And he said, they'll be calling you, and they want to help. And they did. And they helped literally hundreds of families with millions of dollars worth of personal and directed relief. That probably would have never happened if Bill and Beverly Young had not reached out to me at that point. And I and the people in my community will be ever grateful for them. So we've lost, arguably, I think, the greatest Republican member of this body in the last 2 generations. We've not seen his like before, and it will be a long time again before we see anyone that rivals his compassion, his character, his civility, his decency, and his absolute devotion and commitment to our country and to the men and women who defend it. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, and I yield 2 minutes to another member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dent from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I, too, want to take a moment to reflect upon the life and service and dedication of Bill Young. Much has been said about him already this evening. I, too, like many, I look back to that corner, and I want to see Bill Young there, but obviously he's not with us. Before calling Florida his home, Chairman Young was actually born in Harmarville, Pennsylvania, in Allegheny County in western Pennsylvania, that area best known for steel and coal, and a lot of tough people came out of that area, and certainly Bill Young, I think, really had a lot of the character traits I associate with people there. He could be very tough when he needed to be, very firm, just like steel. But also, we should not forget about his compassion. He was a kind man, a gentle man, a patient man. I would often ask him questions or make a request of him from time to time, and he always listened to me very patiently. And he had served here for 22 terms. He didn't have to spend a whole lot of time with me, but he did. And I always appreciated that. You know, he was a great mentor to me and to so many other members here. Just a pleasure to serve with him. But some other things about Chairman Young, too. It's been stated, too, about his support of our troops, particularly our wounded warriors, and the impact that they had on him, and frankly the impact that he made on those wounded warriors. But when you get beyond the defense and veterans policy, though, Chairman Young played an integral role in creating a national registry for bone marrow donors more than 25 years ago, back in 1986. And that registry helped save more than 50,000 lives over the years. So, again, not having known Bill Young as long as some of my colleagues, I just want to say what an extraordinary privilege it was for me to serve with him, to know him, to call him a friend, and really to be one of my mentors here in the House. My deepest thoughts and prayers go out to Beverly and the entire Young family during this difficult time. At this time, I would yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to yield time to one of Mr. Young's colleagues from Florida, Mr. Posey.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I first met the man, the legend really, known as Bill Young in 1974. But it wasn't until I got elected to Congress in 2008 that I realized what a larger-than-life true leader this man was, and what a wonderful and great mentor he was, not just to me and everybody in my freshman class, but we find out everybody that's ever served in this place. Wise, gentle, kind, honest, thoughtful, helpful to anyone just for the asking. I called him hero, and you know, till his last days, he would blush. He was so humble that anybody would address him like that. Just what a wonderful man. And never, ever before, and probably never again, will every man and woman serving us in uniform have as great an advocate as they had in Congressman Young. My thoughts and prayers remain with Beverly, his family, and his staff. Rest in peace, Bill. Yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to yield time to another colleague from Florida, a member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, sir, and it's with great humility that I stand here tonight, and I think you've heard from a lot of members tonight talk about Bill Young. I think he's had the same impression on so many members on this side of the aisle and on the other side about his humility, about his true caring about people, about the caring that he has for the members of the military. You know, it struck me so much about Bill and his wife Beverly was their true compassion, but particularly is the compassion as it relates to those who serve us. As a father and a parent of 3 sons who served in the United States Army, Beverly was really the fire behind Bill at a lot of these issues as it relates to our veterans. Bill led the way, but Beverly was right there carrying the flag alongside of Bill. Madam Speaker, they were a team together. They worked together for the betterment of all, and that's why Bill is such a great American. And while you've heard tonight in this House talk about his legacy, that you can't replace Bill Young. When I first met Bill Young here in this chamber 3 years ago, he was on that side, sitting over there, and he'd had a fall, and he was injured, and he'd been at Walter Reed Army Hospital, and his health continued to decline over these last 3 years. But I came in every day to these chambers to go see Bill Young, because Bill was such a good, kind-hearted person. Great grip when he shook your hand, but I always had a smile. When you asked him, Mr. Chairman, how are you feeling today? It was never about him. You've heard that from other members today. It was always about, how are your sons? How are your boys? Because he knew that they were serving in harm's way in Iraq and have been in Afghanistan. He was more worried about them than himself. I saw him and his wife, Beverly, on the airplane ride back to Tampa almost every week. And without fail, they would offer their better seats to a serviceman or woman who was in uniform walking down the aisle. They'd get up and say, would you sit here? Because that was just how they're built. Bill and Beverly were a perfect match. And Bill has gone on to a place that we can only aspire to go. I truly believe that Bill's at the right hand of God, hopefully maybe talking about appropriations, but talking about what's right with America. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the time that you've given all of us to be down here to talk about our good friend, C.W. Bill Young, who will be missed by all. God bless America.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. And our hour is just about over. We could go on for hours, but I think we've all heard tonight that Bill Young was a man that loved his Lord, he loved his wife, he loved his family, he loved his country. And you might say It just seems like they don't make them like that anymore. But the truth is, they never did. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members be given 5 days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, it's an honor and a privilege to rise this evening and once again stand as an anchor for the Congressional Black Caucus special order, this hour of power, where for the next 60 minutes, members of the Congressional Black Caucus will have an opportunity to speak to the American people about building a budget to create progress and prosperity for all Americans in this great country of ours. Now, earlier today, myself and several other members of Congress, including the distinguished representative from the 9th Congressional District, Yvette Clarke, and the legendary Congressman John Lewis, had an opportunity to attend the homegoing service of Congressman Major Owens, who so proudly served in this institution for 24 years, first elected in 1982, having retired in 2006. And as I listened to speaker after speaker reflect on Congressman Owens' time in this great institution, it seemed to me that one of the things that became increasingly clear was his steadfast commitment to making sure that the funding priorities that emanated from this Congress were decent, were humane, were humanitarian, and were designed to stand up for and protect the least of those in American society. Congressman Owens, during his 24 years in this Congress, consistently stood up for funding as it relates to early childhood education. He consistently stood up for funding for historically black colleges and universities. He consistently stood up for social safety net programs. He consistently stood up to open up the doors of the American dream for the greatest number of people possible. And so in that regard, on the day of his homegoing service, I think it appropriate that we just dedicate the pathway toward prosperity that we're endeavoring to put forth today in the great spirit of Congressman Major Owens, who for more than 2 decades labored in the vineyards of this Congress fighting for budgets that stood up for the least of those amongst us. I want to yield first to the distinguished chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus, who so ably and passionately and intelligently led the CBC forward in this 113th Congress. Let me now yield to the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio, Chairwoman Marcia Fudge.
Thank you. I thank my friend for yielding and would like to thank my colleagues, Congressman Jeffries and Horsford, for once again leading the Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour. Mr. Speaker, this week the House and Senate conferees will begin deliberations to produce a budget for the first time in 4 years. Mr. Speaker, these deliberations, which are long overdue, are critical because they may provide a long-term plan that will continue to move our country forward out of our economic recession and towards a stronger America. There is a long overdue discussion needed. For so many around this country, the barriers to economic opportunity and mobility have become insurmountable. The American people are looking to Congress to provide leadership and to turn our economy around. Unfortunately, some in Congress have put austerity before economic recovery, draining resources that might otherwise have improved our economic outlook. While many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are focused on shrinking the government at any cost, the CBC is focused on making our government smarter and its programs more efficient. It is time to prioritize projects that will not only turn our country's economy around, but that will also open the doors of opportunity for future generations. No longer can we ignore high levels of unemployment among those living in poverty and the disproportionately high unemployment rates among people of color. We cannot pretend that our current investments in education are sufficient while report after report details our country's academic shortcomings and our declining international standing. We must acknowledge the fact that 1 in 5 children is hungry, and nearly 50 million Americans live in households suffering from food insecurity. We must face the reality of a crumbling transportation infrastructure and the fact that improvement costs rise every year we delay investments. Congress can spend the next month and a half hiding from these truths and hoping for an improved economy that will magically fix these problems. Or we can directly address our issues through bipartisan cooperation and with a common goal to make our country better. Congress can place a renewed focus on investing in the American people through quality programs that promote access, equality, and accountability. All this can be done while we cut wasteful spending, preserve the Affordable Care Act, and set the stage for meaningful tax reform. Admittedly, that may seem like a lot of priorities to tackle for one Congress, much less this one. But we can. We can do this if we move past the usual partisan bickering and do what is most important for the nation. Of course, as they say, the devil is in the details. A very smart, ambitious, and detailed plan is necessary to make it work. Luckily, the Congressional Black Caucus has just the plan to make this work. The CBC budget. The CBC budget cuts wasteful spending, invests in education, preserves the ACA, provides the resources to rebuild our transportation infrastructure, addresses crippling poverty, creates jobs now, and ensures America is a leader in the high-growth industries of the future. And I want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott for all of his work on the CBC budget. By considering ideas and proposals from the CBC budget, Congress can stimulate the economy while expanding the middle class. From the dark days of the government shutdown, this opportunity is now a bright spot for Congress and this country. We can rebuild America using the principles on which our nation was founded, that everyone, no matter their background, should have the opportunity to achieve their dreams. To my colleagues in the House and Senate, we have the opportunity and a blueprint. Let's build a better America together. I yield back.
Thank the distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus for her always thoughtful and eloquent remarks. And now I want to yield some time to the architect of the CBC budget, the distinguished gentleman from Virginia.